Hey everybody, it's LavenderTowne, and this is my series where I go into Reddit community r/menwritingwomen and I literally draw the Lovecraftian descriptions of women from there. This episode is a special episode. It's the WomanAuthors edition. I did want to do a completely inverted one of women describing men. I do have one example of that in this video, so buckle up for that one. First up, we have The Case for Marrying an Older Man by Gracie Sophia Christine. So naturally, I began to lug a heavy suitcase of books each Saturday to the Harvard Business School to work on my Nabokov paper. In one cavernous, well-appointed room sat approximately 50 of the planet's most suitable bachelors. I had high breasts, most of my eggs, plausible deniability when it came to my purity, a flush ponytail, a pep in my step that had yet to run out. Apologies to progress, but older men still desired those things. Okay, so let's break this passage down. Generally, the way that she's describing herself, she's mostly just talking about how she's young, and she's describing it in like the weirdest way possible. So the first things I wanted to draw attention to, of course, was the eggs comment. This is just a way for the author to say that she is young, because you start ovulating when you're anywhere from like 11 to 14 these days. That happens when you get your first period. So she's just saying that she's young enough that she hasn't ovulated out most of her eggs, which is just, I mean, it's a little brood queen vibes, but that's all right. We are going to have to draw that with a slightly larger egg because the human egg is quite small. So I'm drawing her just sort of like juggling a bunch of eggs. She's only dropped like one. I also, of course, have to include her high breasts. So plausible deniability when it came to purity. I'm assuming when she talks about purity, she's not like talking about the purity of her heart or her convictions. She's definitely talking about her virginity. And again, like, it's just a wild way to talk about yourself, I guess, especially seeing as this seems to be like one of the big benefits that make these Harvard educated bachelors possibly interested in her. So the thing I think that's so interesting or funny about this is like describing only like factors of your youth as the thing that would get a guy interested in you, especially an older man. I feel like you're really setting yourself up. She says apologies to progress as if it's, she's like, I don't want to be politically correct about this, but I'm willing to face biological facts that all older men prefer younger women. It's just an insane thing to say, essentially. I'm not saying that there isn't a large proportion of people who prefer younger women, but I do think that like this mindset as if like this is just reality and everyone else has to like get over their soft feelings about it, like I just don't think that's true. Like we're totally ignoring all the MILF hunters out here. It's disrespectful to them. And also I do think like she's kind of setting herself up, because if your youth is the only thing that's making you appealing to these eligible bachelors, they're going to trade you in when you get your first wrinkle. So anyway, this whole passage like kind of made me itchy. I just feel like it's kind of weird and gross, and especially like specifically talking about the eggs and the purity and everything, it has kind of like a creepy vibe, again, because you don't start losing your eggs when you're 18. You start losing them when you're like a young girl, right? So I don't know, it was bad vibes all around. So I decided to draw her with this youthful, cheeky energy. She has all her eggs that she's juggling. She's only lost like one or two, as you can see. We've given her those nice high breasts that she's so proud of. Truthfully, she looks like a lot of fun. I would love to talk to her about Nabokov. I really enjoyed Invitation to a Beheading. Peenan is really good. I assume she wants to talk to me about Lolita, but I guess we'll see. Next up, we have A Green Equinox by Elizabeth Maver. Looking at her in those first short moments, I thought, oh yes, I know you. Oh yes. An external, a useful, an uncomplicated, a clearly charted life. Here I knew was somebody who believed in planning, in the future, in the dignity of man. Oh, holy Britomart. She was fair, big-breasted and scrubbed, Nordic. What virtuous nourishment would ooze obligingly from those globular breasts? Mine were trim and neat and rakish, because they'd only been used for making love and not for feeding children. Their areolas were turkey brown, as befitted an adventuress, while hers, I knew, for all that they should have gone brown bearing children, would still have the pink look of uninterfered with virginity. As you can see, this sort of thing, it's mainly a question of publicity, she was saying. She spoke extremely clearly, in a voice that was like flawless bronze, softly gonged. On the whole, people seem pretty keen, she said. I bet, I thought with cooling heart, for ours is a keen little town, composed as it is, almost entirely of one class, the intelligent, if not always cultivated middle. Okay, so this passage is like a little bit crazy. First of all, there's nothing wrong or gross about breastfeeding. It's like the most natural thing that a mammal can do. It's part of our whole survival technique as a species. However, I do think that looking at a woman and immediately think about her virtuous nourishment and the color of her areolas and how that relates to her virginity and whether or not she's an adventuress is so insane. It's so like out of pocket and wild and does not pass the sniff test to me. I also absolutely love the description of her being scrubbed. What does this mean? Like, you mean she's clean, or like what? Like, it's in context of her being fair, so it made me think she's like pale, but she looks like she's been like scrubbed recently, so maybe she's like kind of like damp and like blushy, on her skin, like she's just been scrubbed hard with some kind of brush. Nordic was funny. I gave her some little like Viking wings on her head, just to give you the Nordic vibe. And of course her breasts were described as globular. It's looking like a how to draw book that was written by somebody who was extremely lonely. I didn't really know how to draw this in a YouTube okay way, so I just put over where her areolas would be. I gave the virtuous angel because of her virtuous nourishment and the milk that this POV character seems to be unable not to visualize while she's talking to this woman about the town they live in. I also love that her voice sounded like flawless bronze, softly gonged. I just picture her opening her mouth and it sounding like a gong, which is phenomenal. I actually love it. Like, no notes, honestly. This passage in particular makes me want to remind everyone that these videos are not to make fun of any writer. Honestly, like, I don't know the context of a lot of these quotes. I don't know the POV characters. Like, there could be a perfectly decent explanation for why these things are written so weird. And also, I love weird things. Like, I think that weird writing is actually much better than extremely formulaic, boring writing. It's just fun to draw these descriptions literally as they've been plucked out of context, because sometimes they are wild, like this one, because when you draw it literally and you don't know what's going on, it does seem really, really funny. So here is our virtuous Nordic gong voiced woman. She looks quite well, it's hard to look anywhere in particular. There's just a lot going on in this image, but I hope you like her. Next we have this passage from Secrets of a Hollywood Life by Jen Kalanita. Right, she said. So don't go lecturing me about inner resources. Okay, so I sold the mineral rights to my body years ago, but hey, at least I got some good money for mine. I got some money, said Sidra. I got some. Walter leaned her against his parked car. His mouth was slightly lopsided, paisley-shaped, his lips analoid and full, and he kissed her hard. There was something numb and on hold in her. There were small, dark pits of annihilation she discovered in her heart, in the loosening fist of it, and she threw herself into them, falling. So this is actually an example of women writing men. She didn't describe much about him, unfortunately, so all we get of Walter is his mouth, but man, these are some crazy descriptors. Slightly lopsided, that's totally fine. We hear that all the time. For some reason, a lot of female authors seem to have quite a penchant for their male romantic leads having lopsided smiles or grins, but paisley shaped, that's taking it to a whole nother level. Now this is what a paisley pattern looks like, so we can kind of visualize it, and I'm gonna try to stick true to it. I guess they're just saying it has that little curl at the end and gets like yeah, very, very lopsided. And his lips analoid. Now, this is in reference to a type of segmented worm, leeches, or annelids. It's just gross, like the wormy lip. And I think this actually is like a fantastic descriptor if this character is supposed to be sort of repugnant, or we're not supposed to like the idea of kissing him. But it's funny because I do think that in this passage, it seems like it's supposed to be kind of like romantic and like a little bit like, you know, seductive and stuff. So saying he has like lopsided paisley shaped wormy lips is really, really funny, and I love it. So I just absolutely had to draw it right away. I had to include somewhere these small dark pits of annihilation in her heart. So I give him a little heart next to him that has these dark pits that are sort of like voids just swirling inward. I was really trying to draw his mouth in a way that honored the description without being like too blatantly nasty, but I just really couldn't get it to work. I really tried to draw his mouth without making it too like overtly nasty, but something about the paisley shape, the way that it like sloops down, and the fact that his lips have to be like segmented like a worm, he just looks really like sketchy and scary. He's almost doing kind of like an Elvis like sneer, which I guess I can kind of get down with, but in general I think he looks really fascinating. They do say that his lips are also full, so I couldn't like slim them down too much. Yeah, I mean, I guess, look, she's into Walter, you know. For every person there's a perfect match, and she loves his lopsided worm-like mouth, but I can't get down with it, honestly. I hope you guys enjoy Walter and how he turned out, and yeah, I guess, you know who he'd be perfect for is the Eels girl from episode 3 of the series. Next up we have The Well of Tears by Cecilia Dart Thornton. The smudges on the face of the 12-year-old girl walking at his side could not obscure her beauty. Her hair was as black and as shiny as a handful of acacia seeds, and the dark locks clung together in a singular fashion, so that the tapered ends spiked forth like the newly budding tips of a fir tree. Narrow was her waist, no wider than the thigh of a grown man. Her skin was peaches by firelight. Her mouth was the softly curved petal of a pink rose. She wore a linen kirtle beneath a woolen gown, and over her shoulders a traveling cloak, lined with fur, clasped with a brooch of bronze. The matching traveling hood hung behind her shoulders. Like her step-uncle, she had lost her other headgear. Her scarf was dangling from a twig somewhere, having been swept from her scalp during that first frantic scramble away from the northern shores of the marsh. So this passage has a couple of areas where people are really criticizing it. The first, of course, is in the highlighted area, her waist being so narrow that it's no wider than the thigh of a grown man. That is very, very small. Now, there are some guys, especially nowadays, who, through the miracles of training at the gym and also like eating a certain diet, can have quite a juicy thigh, but I'm guessing because she's dressed in like a traveling hood and a cloak, we're not talking about a, you know, like a guy with a huge thick thigh. I think we're talking about kind of an average man, and that is very small in that case for somebody's torso. Like, that's tiny. And then her mouth being the softly curved petal of a pink rose. I just don't know how this could look good. I'm gonna try my best. At first I thought it would be like two petals sort of sandwiched on top of each other, like two potato chips, and that's what I drew at first, but then I realized it's her whole mouth is one petal, so I went back to the drawing board on that one. I also saw some people talking about in the post how weird it is to describe a 12-year-old girl this way, talking about her beauty, like, okay, maybe that's kind of a gray area, maybe it's okay, you know, people say that babies are beautiful and stuff, so like maybe it's not weird vibes, but it does get weirder the longer that you read. And I do think, like, specifically like describing like a kid as being beautiful, and then describing her tiny waist, and then describing her skin in this kind of like very romanticized way, and saying her mouth is the petal of a rose, like all of these things combining together, it does start to give off kind of a much creepier vibe. So yeah, I think that that's somewhat legitimate criticism. For the waist, I did bring in some like stock footage of some guys in shorts just to kind of get a rough idea of how narrow this waist would be. It's really hard to compare because obviously I'm drawing her in a cartoon style and these are like real images of people. Also, like how juicy a man's thigh can range pretty dramatically depending on like the region of the world we're talking about, the era, what kind of like exercise that these adult men are doing. But I think in general, like that is very, very small. And when I kind of estimated at how small it would be, it did look kind of like extremely freakishly narrow, especially for a 12-year-old, because typically when you're that young and you haven't fully gone through puberty yet, you're not going to have a super dramatic difference between your waist and your hips, because that's one of the things that happens as you grow up. And so like at that age, having such a tiny waist, I would assume would make the rest of your body super tiny, but I don't know, it's kind of confusing. The way that they're calling it out specifically makes it sound like she's got a very hourglassy figure, even though she's literally 12. I pulled in some acacia seeds as a reference for her black hair, and I do like the description of her hair being like tapered and looking like the tips of a fir tree. So I basically gave her hair that looks like a coniferous tree, and it looks pretty good. I think they probably didn't mean for me to put the tree top up at the top of her head, but I thought it would be a little funny, and it actually didn't look as bad as I had thought it might. And then for the rest of it, I didn't know what the colors were other than her brooch, so I just kind of stuck with stuff that would offset nicely with her very, very oxidized skin tone. She does look it's not like a supernatural skin tone. It doesn't look like, it doesn't have the depth of like real darker skin tones usually. Like it's a little too warm to look supernatural, but I think because it's a cartoony art style, it's kind of okay. I wanted to sample it directly because I do tend to do very desaturated skin tones, and so I want it to be really authentic to the Peaches by Firelight. But man, it looks like when like a girl does way too much self tanner and turns out kind of like orange, instead of the like nice natural warm skin tone that they're probably going for. So here she is. She doesn't look too bad, honestly. Her mouth was giving me so much trouble, but I think we finally got it to a decent enough place, and she didn't look nearly as wild as I was kind of expecting her to. I get why people are kind of icked out by this passage, but I definitely think like description-wise it's not quite as bad as some of the other ones, so let me know what you guys think. Alright, so here are 4 new entries to my r/menwritingwomen series. Let me know if you have any suggestions for some future videos, or if you know of any books in particular that have some really wild descriptions, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much to my wonderful patrons, including Colorful Ambitions, A.A. Ron, Viet, Raccoon Jam, Grexius, Olia, Brandon Stark, CB, Lucy Amajiki, Liv, Salty Jackrabbit, Ravenscrow, Zocelot, Teal Music, Jabber Dabber Doo, Kadaria, Deadly Nightshade Art, Astrofox Art, The Expressive Poker Face, Tsubaki, Cutie Pie, Kola, JJ Jade, and of course, Blah 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 Blah.